Everything always comes back to Donald Trump, He has sacked a whole load of military commanders, including the most senior commander, who happens to be a black man, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General C.Q. Brown. He's basically America's highest ranking general and only the second black general to serve as chairman. Donald Trump has also sacked the first woman to lead a military service and a number of other figures. The suggestion is that the reason he is doing it is because he's getting rid of those who support diversity and equality in the ranks. Let's see what people think about this. So Sarah Baxter, a columnist for the iPaper, is joining me, I hope, from New York. Hi, Sarah.
Yes. Hi, Anushka.
Thank you for speaking to me. What is the motivation here?
Well, I think you put your finger on it. I mean, why is the top-ranked general in America being fired? He happens to be black. Well, is that being unfair to Donald Trump? Honestly, I don't think so, because Pete Hegseth, his appointment as defense secretary, said clearly that he wanted Brown out, had criticized him before, and has never Brown has never been forgiven for making an incredibly moving videoed statement about the death of George Floyd, talking about the difficulties he had experienced personally, he and his family and his two sons, navigating two worlds, the US military and being a black person. And this, of course, was regarded as woke nonsense rather than actually an incredibly empathetic and inspiring speech. So Hegseth wanted him out. And then, by the way, Hegseth also said the same thing about Admiral Lisa Franchetti, who has served for 40 years and has, been in charge of destroyers, saying that she was a DEI hire in his book before he ever became defense secretary. So they've said it out of their own mouths, basically, that this is the reason why people are going.
And with General Charles C.Q. Brown, as he's known, you're talking about obviously 2020 when George Floyd was killed by a police officer who put a knee on his neck, and then that led, as we all know, to the Black Lives Matter movement. So you're basically saying that 5 years on, this is a reaction to a senior black military commander talking about the impact of his race in his role.
Yes, because if we remember back to 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, everybody was upset by that terrible video. And then, like so many things in America, it became part of a sort of culture war, endless tit for tat. And I feel like what we're witnessing is some of the backlash against that. I should add that it's not just these two people who happen to be black or a woman who have been fired at the top of the defense forces. That Hegseth and Trump, they've also fired senior legal officers, the top legal officers. They're called judge advocates, known as JAGs. And in his book, you just have to read the Hegseth book, really. In his book, Hegseth calls these people jagoffs because he believes they obstruct the military by going on too much about, what they can and can't do. They're the kind of people who say, no, that's a war crime, do not do this. And Hegseth, in his book as well, was representing very much an advocate for people who had been accused of war crimes in Afghanistan. So the top legal people who could hold soldiers to account and call on them to behave appropriately according to Geneva Conventions and all sorts of their own codes of conduct are also being fired. So it's a very worrying situation.
And Sarah, is there any evidence that these promotions were not based on merit, that they were some sort of diversity and equality promotion?
Well, I really recommend for those who have the time to go and search out the video that that General Brown released at the time of George Floyd's murder, because to hear that, you'll hear him speak about how he had to prove himself over and over and over again at being the best at his job or better than people, even when he was a decorated pilot, an incredibly distinguished airman. My dad was in the RAF, by the way, so I really sort of feel for this. When he would be questioned as to whether he was really a pilot because he was black.
Sarah, that's fascinating, and I'm going to look that up straight after this. Thank you very much for your time, and it kind of brings me nicely to another person I want to speak to about this, Calvin Bailey, the Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead, a former RAF wing commander and a black man who has reached very senior levels in the military. What do you make of this decision to fire General Brown but so many others?
Well, hello, Anushka,
Hey.
and thanks very much for having me on today. I think there is a level at which military appointments are politicised anyway, and that is around the three-star. That is the rank at which all of these positions are appointed. So we should expect that people appointed into these positions have some degree of political affiliation. But CQ Brown, and I do agree with your previous speaker, you must go and listen to his speech. CQ Brown is an incredibly intelligent man, highly professional, got an incredible record and combat record, a large number of flying hours, not as many as me, but a significant number of combat hours as well, and appointed as the chief of the U.S. Air Force by Trump during the last administration. He stands absolutely within his position for the competency and experience that he's brought to that role. There is no question that he was ever brought into that position for any other reason than his skill, his experience and valour. And I think what's sad is to see this narrative around his transition. He was due to go at some point anyway. But there has been this narrative that has been wrapped around it that there is some other reason that this is about D&I appointments. And yet, if you look at every single one of these people that is going to be moved on, they are all 30 plus year military professionals, hugely professional. So Admiral Franchetti, she has led a carrier group. The UK has two of those, well, it has one, arguably, but we've got two carriers. She has led one of those. She is a lady of exceptional credibility as well.
I never understand this argument that people make when they say, and they can have their arguments about diversity and inclusion schemes, but this suggestion that promotions are not on merit. If promotions were purely done on merit, then presumably white men have a lot more ability than all the world's women and all the world's non-white men, because they do seem to dominate major positions.
Well, I think what's interesting in this instance is that CQ Brown was promoted meeting all the metrics of the post that he occupied, whereas his nominated replacement, who is John Cain, does not. So that isn't an argument that. So
why is John Cain getting the job?
Exactly. And, so there is greater questioning of the people that are being drawn into these posts rather than the people that are in those posts at the moment. And what CQ says is in these speeches entirely powerful. Like, here is a man that has passed all those wickets, that is there through his competence and professionalism. And yet, at the time of his transition, at the end of his period, people are saying, well, he's being moved on because of D&I, because, he was put there for some reason other than his competence. And that is what people that are black or from minority ethnic backgrounds have to deal with when they find themselves in these positions. And the same with
Have you had that experience yourself, Calvin?
That's absolutely. And it was one of the things that was said to me when I was a young man. There was a guy called Brent Lowe, who's a Canadian guy, who said to me, when you get to wherever you're going to get to, people will ask you why. Like, how did you get there? And you tell them that you worked twice as hard as anyone else. Now, that is a difficult thing to communicate to people, because that is not always true. But it is true when you find yourselves in positions of responsibility with huge amounts of credibility and experience behind you, like CQ Brown does, and then people at a moment in time openly question you. And that's what they did during the Black Lives Matter movement when Mr. Floyd was killed. Here is a national leader who then chooses to go and speak his truth and his experience. And that was why he was, or that is why he has been damned because the fact that he showed leadership and he spoke up and he explained what had happened to himself and to his family and his life experience, and we cannot tell him that isn't untrue, because we are witnessing it now. At the end of a 40-plus glittering career, he's reached the top of his organisation, and people are saying, "Well, he was there because of DNI."
Calvin, thank you so much for your time. Do keep calling in. Call in on that as well. What do you make of that decision by Donald Trump to fire the top black US military officer